Thank you for the kind introduction. It took a little bit of time to get the slides up on here, so I already was thinking about doing it without slides. Luckily, my husband was here with a laptop that works. How many here know about how this whole board reporting stuff works? Half? 1/3 maybe? Okay, good. So where this question comes from? When I was new to Apache, I had no idea how this entire reporting stuff works. When I had my first project, which was called Apache Mahout, there was this weird time frame where someone was writing something up, sending it to a mailing list, and then maybe or maybe not some feedback would be coming back. At some point, I realized that all of the ASF projects are doing that on a regular basis, like on a quarterly basis. Now, thinking about how many projects there are, and thinking about them reporting each quarter, the questions that I asked myself is, do these directors really read this stuff? Like all of them, like thoroughly? I have been a director by now, and the answer is fairly simple. So I can go out now and have coffee, right? But likely you want to know how that works. First of all, a disclaimer. What I'm going to tell you is based on my personal experience from the period in 2016-17 and in 2018-19. Depending on who's on the board, things may be different, experiences may be different. This is mine. Another disclaimer, a lot of the learnings that benefited me when I was a director were based on some things that I heard at my very first ApacheCon. Well, actually, that was Amsterdam 2008. There, Bertrand gave a talk on asynchronous communication. Today, you can look it up on YouTube and watch it yourself. It's some of the basic principles on how Apache projects operate. So, quick show of hands. How many users of Apache projects do we have in the room? And I want to see all hands. Because if you have a mobile phone, likely you're using Apache software. How many committers are here? Still pretty much everyone? How many ASF members? Okay, half. How many board or former board members? Okay, the two of you, could you two keep me honest? If I'm telling bullshit, you come up on stage and help me. Thank you. So how many of you have contributed to any board meeting agenda? Okay, 1/3, roughly half. Okay, so you know what I'll be talking about. I will be quickly skipping over the following slides. We've had several Apache Way talks previously, knowing that several of you are at least committers. I assume that you know what the roles look like. So, most likely you're using an ASF project. This project is being developed by a group of people, independent developers, independent contributors working together. If people who contribute do this for long enough or with enough commitment, they will be called committers. For some projects, it's identical with the set of committers, much as Shane explained earlier. For some, there's a different set or a subset that's being made PMC member. PMC actually means Project Management Committee, but they are not the ones who set project direction and tell people what to do. They are the ones providing oversight. Now, some of the people active in those projects may be members of the foundation itself. What does it mean to be a member of the foundation? Do you tell projects what they should be doing? Clearly not. What you do is that you do provide oversight over the foundation, but on a regular basis, like every 12 months, you go ahead and vote for a board of directors. So we do have a mission statement too. We'll come back to that later on. And so 9 directors do have several tasks or several things that they have to do. They have to provide, as the website says, operational oversight, project oversight. They have to set direction and manage foundation assets. So, They are responsible for oversight. What does that mean? We will dig deeper into the project oversight part. I've mentioned earlier that each of our projects on a quarterly basis sends project reports to the board. What does project oversight mean? Projects are pretty much independent, except when they are not. The board will not meddle with technical issues, asterisk, unless projects fail to fix or at least respond to security issues. The board will not meddle with how projects run their community unless those projects fail to be run in a vendor-neutral and open way. The board will not meddle with legal issues except when the projects fail to respond to legal issues, say licensing or trademark issues. Also, where am I? So, how does that work? All of those projects send in quarterly reports. They are supposed to report not so much on the technical side. The focus will be much more like Justin explained during the incubator talk on how the project is being run, how well the community is doing. So some of these directors will dive slightly deeper into project communication, pointing out when conversations should have happened not on a private list but in public. Now remember those 9 people? If you're in a company and the company is small enough, chances are that you are co-located. So you would schedule a meeting, get everyone in a room and discuss things there. Now, when I was a director, we had people from the US West Coast, US East Coast. We had people from Europe and we had people from Australia. Getting every one of those into a room every month is pretty much out of the question. Getting any one of those on a phone call more than once a month on a volunteer basis also is pretty much out of the question. So how does that work? Some of these people, by the way, have dedicated time for that task. Say their employer says, you get a certain amount of time during your working hours to do that. Others do that on a full free-time volunteer basis. Not all of them have the time to monitor real-time communication channels all the time. Also, when we would be using real-time communication channels, when someone's communicating who lives in the US West Coast or East Coast, then likely someone in Australia is still asleep, so they can't participate. Also, the time slots that people have to dedicate to those tasks may be different. So for me personally, each week I would dedicate a couple hours on a specific day in the week in order to do these tasks. Someone else on the board would take different time slices. What are the constraints? Those people still have to coordinate somehow. No decision can be taken by one director alone, so there has to be some kind of communication and some kind of consensus building. In a nutshell, that is pretty similar to how we run our projects. All of the communications that's essential should be happening on board at apache.org. That's not public, as in Google Public, but every ASF member and at least every PMC chair has access to it and can participate. So this way we do have a coordination medium and a communication medium where we can participate asynchronously. So essentially, what didn't happen on a mailing list didn't happen still applies. And with mailing lists, I want to stress that at Apache, those are not the emails that you know from your day-to-day work, but it's really mailing lists which are being archived, which are searchable, and where you do have stable links to your communication. There are some issues that won't be discussed on that list. Mostly they relate to people issues, like we need a new person to fill a certain operations position. This is something that you do not want to discuss in front of 700 people, like the pros and cons of specific individuals. But other than that, pretty much everything is available for oversight to 700 members. On top of that, there is a monthly board meeting where we will go through certain discussion items. However, preparation for that meeting happens mostly beforehand and asynchronously. Now I will show you the meeting agenda. It's the right-hand side. Hands up for how long you think that synchronous meeting will take. Hands up if you think it's 10 hours. Hands up if you think it's 5 hours. Hands up if you think it's 2 hours or less. Okay, someone participated. I do see hands of directors, so they know that we can trim that down to less than 2 hours. I know people who didn't believe me. So what is on that agenda? There are 160 items. 97 of these need review and approval from at least 5 directors. 75 of these require some sort of feedback. Positive, negative, question, whatever. In addition, there's usually at least 1 or 2 important decisions on that agenda where the solution isn't obvious. So you need a bit more of communication happening before you have a solution. Plus, there are several more questions queuing up. So how do we get through that in less than 2 hours? And trust me, I want to be through that in less than 2 hours because in my time zone, that's 7:30 p.m. So at some point, I want to go to bed. Okay, we'll go through part by part. We have 160 agenda items. How do you go through them? You make them available for reading well ahead of time. So the way it works is that all of the reports are being handed in at least, hopefully, please, 3 days before the meeting. If it's like 3 hours, like I just said, it's mostly likely that it's going to be rejected. Likely people will read it still, but most likely for educational purposes it's going to be rejected. Don't worry, submit it next time, all done, fine. A couple of years ago, I was wondering whether these people actually read that stuff. I was on a PMC of Apache Mahout, so I could legitimately add stuff to the report of Apache Mahout. I believe it was in 2013, October, November-ish, where I added a line to the report to figure out whether these people actually read that stuff, because I didn't believe it. I didn't do that during the report writing period at Apache Mahout, because I just messed up my schedule. So I went to the actual data source, added that line, and waited. It didn't take many hours for me to receive feedback in my private email. After a couple days, every single director had apparently read that line at the very end of that report and sent me a message back. You can still check out what that line was if you go to the archived reports, which are available publicly, and try to figure out what I added, what triggered action from every director. One thing that hopefully I'm not making enemies here. If you want to try it out in your personal project and you don't believe me those people are reading, try adding something. You will trigger a reaction. Also, it helps to go through the process of adding something to your project's report in order to understand the process. So I said that there are over 90 reports that need a pre-approval. How does that work? You enable pre-approvals. So essentially, before the meeting happens, directors are able to mark a report as, yeah, that's good, I don't have to vote with my voice on that, that is good. And as soon as there are at least 5 directors who have done that, the report won't show up in the agenda anymore, it won't be discussed anymore. The way it works, there's a pretty web interface there. It does have a nice button which says Approve Report. If 5 people do that, it's out, unless someone clicks a button of this report needs further discussion, which means that it's marked as it will appear in the meeting agenda. So the funny thing about this nice little web interface, I typically read some of those reports while I was commuting. If you go on the German subway, sometimes you do not have connectivity. However, this thing is offline first, so I can go read, I can submit my pre-approvals, and I can check them in once I have network connectivity again. Okay, what about those where you need some kind of feedback, quick discussions? Again, you enable asynchronous communication in order to clear questions before the meeting actually happens. That can happen on board at apache.org, but it also can happen in the agenda itself. Often those questions that directors come up with during reading this stuff can be cleared before the actual meeting happens. You can see that in an example. There's a button, Add Comment. It will appear on the upper right corner so that all of the comments that were already made, those are being visible. If you are a PMC chair, or you can participate and answer those questions right away, so that all of those issues are out of the way for the meeting itself. Plus, all of this communication is being sent to project private lists after the meeting happened. So it's not like intransparent. So what does the tooling look like for this sophisticated meeting? It sounds like rocket science, doesn't it? Actually, the tooling is very tailored towards the ASF in that, for historical reasons, it does build upon the way this meeting was run years ago. So what kind of database is behind the web interface? Well, it's a text file. You can go to Subversion today, you can check it out, you can make your modifications, check it back in, and it will appear. So you don't have to go through the web interface. The funny thing is the technology isn't what makes the magic happen. What makes the magic happen is people making sure that communication happens before the meetings, that communication happens asynchronously, so that as little as possible makes it into the synchronous meeting. So how is the meeting itself being run? Back when I was there, it was run through a regular phone call. You would call in. There is a back channel on IRC. So any additional comments, back chatter, jokes, funny things would be shared on IRC. So the meeting that is on call could focus on the tasks at hand. There is one person responsible for running through the meeting. There's one person as a secretary responsible for making notes during the meeting. That really helps with keeping people focused. It also helps with having people on the call for whom it's 4 a.m. in the morning, so that everyone else remembers to be very focused on the task at hand. If you want to check out the web interface, there's a project called Apache Whimsy. According to a children's book that I have at home, which collects like 50 strange words from all over the world, whimsy means it's something funny, something whimsical, strange. Through whimsy.apache.org, you have access to several foundation toolings. If you don't like what you see, patches are welcome. You can see the source code on github/apache/whimsy. So it's available under an Apache license. You can even use it yourself. So what about the things that go beyond project oversight? What about the 1 or 2 important decisions on the agenda? How are those being handled? I found a book that I once read, which in retrospect explained quite a bit of how the ASF works to me. So in that book it says that in order to drive engagement, you should get people involved in the decision-making process. Now at Apache we don't talk about just 3 people, we talk about more like 700 people. So typically you would refer back to your purpose, back to your mission, in order to align people and in order to bring them behind what you want to achieve. Now remember that we are a community of self-interested individuals. Remember that scratch your own itch. So bringing people together actually may feel more like a herding cats kind of exercise. So at the project level, the purpose is the mission of the project. At the foundation level, it becomes a bit more vague. However, there is a mission too which helps us. We are there for the public good. We are there to provide services and support for like-minded software project communities, which consist of individuals who participate. Now, what are the principles that I tried to apply when I was part of the board of directors when faced with such a discussion and decision making? So what I have learned at the ASF is traditionally you can make a decision and then you start a change process. At some point you're done and you can execute against it. The other way around, you could first engage people in the decision-making process, come to a conclusion of how you want to move forward and execute. The time typically isn't very much different. However, you get much more valuable feedback in the second approach. So much like we do in software development, the goal is to open up the creation process in order to pull people in order to hear other voices. There is a question on how far we can push that boundary at the foundation level. Remember, there are at least 700 people who could potentially be subscribed to board at Apache. Now, if you have one question and 700 people respond, that's not going to scale very well. Hopefully, so 600 people will agree on one thing, maybe even 699, maybe even 700 people. What does help is to have people in that group, on that mailing list, who are very good at spotting where consensus has already been reached. Being software engineers, we are very good at debugging. We are very good at spotting where things are still misaligned. So what helped me when I was a director was having someone in that group who would regularly remind us that, wait a minute, on these 80%, 90%, we already agree. Let's focus on the remaining 10% where we still have disagreement and where we need to move forward. So it also helps to have a broad set of communication skills in order to not let discussions dissolve into flame wars. So it also takes skillful moderation, and I don't mean technical moderation, but like the stuff that you learn in soft skills lessons in order to allow all voices to be heard and integrated. One thing I did learn, though, is that engaging people takes time. However, what drives me personally is that essentially as a leader, I'm accountable to everybody. And people can expect that I do not only explain what I am doing, but also explain why I'm doing it. If I'm explaining why, I get much better buy-in. And people will understand where I want to go and why I want to go there. And hopefully follow me. Now, I said that engaging people takes time. There are times when things will become to feel overwhelming. Most likely, in many cases, that's because someone is moving too fast or because some issue is being moved too fast. It helps to slow down. It helps to intentionally switch off and go offline and to ignore that stuff. At some point, maybe if you switch off now, come back a couple hours later, reread this email thread, it will read very much differently. You will notice some subtleties that you didn't notice before. And that is something that you can take back to your projects as well. If it feels overwhelming, just slow down, switch off, and come back later. And oftentimes, when you come back later, you notice some subtleties that you didn't notice before. So essentially, there is one learning for me that slower decisions lead to better results. There were times when I was very frustrated with how the ASF was working because it was incredibly slow. The learning for me was that there are times in projects which aren't a good fit for the ASF, so sometimes it's better to move out and still do good for the community there. Maybe just go a different path. However, if you want to change something, you will have to bring time with you. So at the end of the day, also for those decisions and questions where the solution isn't obvious. It helps to enable asynchronous communication in order to prepare consensus. It helps to not have these discussions in the synchronous meeting, but to prepare consensus on this asynchronous communication channel. So at the end of the day, this channel should be a board ad. What this needs is people who listen actively. It needs people who moderate discussions with participants with wildly different backgrounds and wildly different agendas and goals. It needs people who know this, how to do this kind of moderation in a written medium. Some kind of feedback that I got from my colleagues at work, where I was driving towards more written communication, was when they were watching me during discussions, they were noticing that the same moderations that they do in face-to-face meetings, they would recognize in this written medium as well. So the same kind of stuff still has to happen. And it needs, above and beyond all, it needs people who are able to slow down and who allow others to slow down. Now, what about those other items that are queuing up? Being a director sometimes feels like you need more than 2 hands. It will feel overwhelming. There are always too many things to do at once. There are always too many open issues. So essentially, you will need to prioritize. You will need to put your focus on one important thing. It will mean that other important things are being left aside. The plus side, though, is that you are not alone. First of all, there are 9 of you. Second of all, there are another 700 experienced members who will step up and volunteer. So the things that I've taken back from my time was that you don't have to be a director in order to change something, or in order to do something meaningful, or to make a very impactful contribution. You can do that without that title. So the traditional option in order to get rid of these tasks is to tell someone, hey, go ahead, do X. Except none of those contributing to the ASF, with a few exceptions, are being paid to do so. So if you do that too often or in a way that's not persuasive enough, people will just go and say, no, sorry, won't do it. Something that sometimes works is to use your soapbox. Is to talk about the issues that you see and to ask for volunteers to become active. It also helps to share what you're working on early so that you can get not only feedback but also helping hands. Apache Whimsy itself wasn't being developed by a director itself. It was someone who stepped up in order to help out. Also, it makes it easier if you release early and release often and make smaller steps in contrast to doing a big bang release. First of all, those steps are easier to roll back if you've made a mistake. Second of all, it's easier to convince 700 people to make a small step and to get consensus on that small step compared to something very big. So essentially, this reminds me to my work that I've been doing in regular Apache and open source projects before. It means inspiring other volunteers to become active. So this is something that people on our projects do on a daily basis. So with that, we are essentially through the entire challenge. Now, if you're not a member, and if you're not a PMC chair, where can you see the results of that? Is there a way to check that agenda file? Actually, there is. All of that is being published at the earliest 1 month after the meeting happens. Those meeting minutes are being made publicly available, so you can go through these archives. They are available, I believe, up until the time when the foundation was created, so you can dig into history all the way back. So to summarize, what you need for such a large agenda to shrink down to 1 to 2 hours is to enable reading before the meeting happens, is to enable pre-approvals, is to enable asynchronous communication in order to clear questions, It's to enable asynchronous communication in order to prepare consensus. It's also in order to inspire volunteers to become active. And for that, I'm open for questions and corrections. There's one over here.
Since Apache is all about community and all about family, I will simply ask the easy question of, so how is your 6-year-old doing?
She's sitting up there.
Oh,
Ask
hi.
her.
Hi.
So the reason why he knows that I have a 6-year-old is that she was attending pretty much every board call when I was a director. That's possible as well. Any other questions? Denise.
As you know, I recruited you onto the board of the InterSource Commons because I want to graft this idea to them. But I noticed, I mean, we know there's not a lot of turnover typically in Apache board, right? Sort of the same people serve over and over again.
Except this year.
A little bit, right? I mean, occasionally there's a new person or two, but generally it's been the case that it's the same people over and over again. So those people are burnt into this way of working. But do you have onboarding for new board members to get them to realize what the time commitment is so that this can work?
There's informal onboarding. When I became a board member, I had no clue how that worked. Honestly, I hadn't participated in any of the board calls before. So what we did was to have those new board members who could make it to a call that was out of schedule. We also had some of the regular participants who could make it, like not everyone. And then we went through I believe it was the agenda of the previous month, where the tooling was being shown, where dial-in was being tried, where the back channel was being shown. And it kind of sort of was like a real meeting. But there was time for questions asking, there was time for jokes, and there was time for getting people into that. What also happens if there is time on the schedule of the board members is at the beginning of the term to get everyone really together in one room and have a meal together so that you know who's speaking. For me, I had it easier than other newcomers because even though I hadn't been active that much, I knew everyone's face. I also received a very helpful email where people were explaining to me how people operate and what their values look like. I was like, I know these people already, but thank you. But that was really helpful. Rich.
Also, in years when we have a large turnover in board members, we do have an in-person meeting. This year, we had a meeting in Chicago because we had a very large turnover, and I think everybody was present, yeah, and we were able to do a sample meeting there as well. And there's also a discussion going on right now on the board list about having sort of mentoring of people that we might want to nominate someday as a board member and having them sit in on meetings and kind of have a ride along so that they are more familiar with that process in the event that they're elected.
So one thing that I was doing when I was a board member, every time we had a new PMC chair, I would write an email to them, like, come to the board meeting. It looks scary, it looks boring, dial in. First of all, it's not scary because you know these people. Second of all, it won't take a ton of your time, believe me. I know you don't believe me, but believe me. And third of all, yes, it will be fun. Believe me, it's not a regular corporate meeting where people run through it. Roughly half accepted that offer, because even if you're a new PMC chair, it helps to understand the process and it helps to understand what directors look for in those reports. That's one of the reasons why I submitted this talk at ApacheCon and why I'm very grateful for the cameras there in the back, because I want to make it more transparent and more visible of how that works. Anything else?
So partly a response to echo what Rich was saying, we've done a lot of work in terms of the board thinking about how to make people understand what things are happening. The other point is please ask, especially if you're an Apache member who might be thinking about whether or not you'd want to do this. Please step up and ask either on the board list or ask one of us. Everybody in the board is happy to talk to any member about how it works, what it really means. And to help them, I'll ask you, so what was the most surprising thing about being a director that you found that you wouldn't have thought of beforehand, and afterwards you're like, oh, wow.
So it was not one most surprising thing. Actually, the most surprising thing was when I was not a director and when I added this one line, and really, literally all 9 came back. I didn't believe that these people would read all of that. That was the most surprising thing, actually. Also, one thing about onboarding, Denise, you mentioned that those on the board at Apache know how that works. Most of the principles that I've been talking about, I already knew through our projects. So it wasn't all that different. It was just different questions, essentially.
Anyone?
I don't want to stand between you and your flight home or your cup of coffee or dinner.
Hello.
Hi.
In our project, we think about helping our chair to write board reports. And so
Totally do so.
What?
Totally do so.
Yeah, but my question is, what do you like to read?
There is a template that you can use in order to bootstrap it. The stuff that me personally I've been focusing on is how does the community operate? Are you healthy? Do you need help? Is everything okay for you? There's 2 more directors. Add your feedback. Shane.
So as a director, and I think I speak for many of the other ones, we have a reporter tool, reporter.apache.org, that has sort of a framework, and there's a new version that asks a few questions and then collects statistics, and then prompts you to think about what your project has done. So what I value most in a typical board report is, can I see from the human writing that somebody's actually thought about what the project did in the past 3 months and explained it to me, even briefly. But simply having a list of releases and the new committer names, that's not interesting. You just push the button in the reporter saying, oh, we got together and decided on a new module this year, and then we're really hoping to switch to time-based releases next year. Somebody thought about it and wrote about that and talked about the community making decisions, getting things done, maybe having problems. Another key point is, if there is some problem that you feel you're not quite sure about the project's deciding things or whatever, let the board know. I think one of the biggest things is surprising the board after the fact, or not mentioning a problem and letting it fester and having the board find out about it. Those are really bad things. We don't like being surprised. We want to hear, as with the meeting, we want to hear what's happening ahead of time, or even just concerns ahead of time. There are some projects who will say, we have an issue statement, we say, we don't have any issues, but we are tracking this question, and we're going to figure it out. That happens, great, right? And even if it blows up next month, I can say, oh, they were already thinking about it. No problem. Something blows up, and then later the project says, oh, we were thinking about this. Well, that doesn't help us as much. So as much human thought into saying, here's what we did, is the best thing, I think.
One thing I want to add to that is that during that report, you're supposed to cover 3 months. There is a bias in recency when writing that thing just before the meeting happens. What I've seen some projects do is to have like a wiki page or in their version control system a specific file where they collect significant stuff that they want to mention in their next board report. So that makes it easier to then write it. Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you for your time and have a safe trip home.